Awesome. Hello and welcome to our WOMEESA panel discussion to commemorate International Women's Day 2023. I am Fernanda and I am joined by Alanis, and together we will be hosting today's panel on behalf of the WOMEESA committee.
So we begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which I am personally today, which is the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and we recognise their continuing connection to the land.
As WOMEESA is an international Australasian organization, we also pay our respects to the Maori, Astangata, Whenua, and Te Tiriti o Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend this to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Indigenous peoples were the first Australian and New Zealand earth and environmental scientists, and we have a lot to learn from their deep knowledge that spans tens of thousands of years.
WOMEESA is a unified Australasian network of women working in earth and environmental sciences in academia, industry, and government. One of our goals is to promote awareness about gender equity, inclusion, and diversity in our fields.
And so today, tomorrow actually, is International Women's Day, and it is a United Nations initiative. And the UN's official theme for this year is Cracking the Code, Innovation for a Gender Equal Future. So to align and celebrate with this theme, we have three amazing WOMEESA members with us today, all from different fields and different career stages throughout Australia and New Zealand. This panel today will discuss how we can crack the code and create flourishing careers within earth and environmental sciences as women scientists and innovate for a gender equal future within our fields.
So firstly, we will let the panelists introduce themselves, ask them some questions to discuss, and finally, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. So please first join me in welcoming Susan Bull, Arana Gretsch, and Casey Blundell. Thank you so much for joining us today. So to start, can I ask each of you in turn to tell us what's your job and what's the best part of it? Please, Susan.
Oh, I can start. Yeah. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks heaps for asking me to be involved in this. It's really cool. And I hope I can, I don't know, have some interesting things to say, I suppose. So I'm Suze, and I work at GNS Science in New Zealand, which is a Crown Research Institute. And my job is I'm a team leader for the basin analysis team. So we do sedimentary basin work, anything subsurface geology. That's just half my job. And then the other part is I do my own research into underwater landslides and their hazards. That's just my paid job, because my real job, of course, is my mum to 4-year-old and 6-year-old. So I'm always tired. And I think the thing I enjoy most about my job, I've got a bit of a drippy answer for you, so I apologize in advance. But a little bit of background to me is I worked in the oil industry when I finished my PhD. I never thought a research job would be a thing for me. I thought it's kind of reserved for superstars. And so I took an industry job, didn't like it really, came to GNS about 10 years ago and did petroleum work. And then about 4 years ago, we restructured and lost all the petroleum funding. So like I'm just super happy to do science. Like that's probably one of the best bits of my job is I've ended up being able to do some research and working in science. And as I've like moved my research more from like an academic kind of sedimentary or basin fill type thing to more hazards applications, like just realizing we work with such amazing people. And again, I know it's a bit drippy, but there are some outstanding people, and it's not just in science but everywhere else. And I've just been really enjoying a lot of those interactions lately. So I'm just happy to be here, to be frank. And yeah, that's probably the best thing about my job.
Oh, thank you so much, Suze. And Casey, can you tell us what's your job and what's the best part of it?
So yeah, thank you for having me today. So I work at the moment for a very small junior exploration company here in Australia. And when I say small, I'm the only employee, the only technical staff member. So I'm kind of responsible for everything that goes on in the day-to-day with respect to all of our projects. We have a few in Queensland, a couple in WA. So that's looking at the historical data that exists, doing some of the research, understanding the geology and the potential of the projects, The deposit styles were across a few different commodities. I also draft a lot of the technical reports for the mines department and draft some of our ASX releases. But yeah, it's pretty full on. It's a lot of work, but the best part about it is, I think, the fact that it is quite a lot of variety. It's teaching me a lot very, very rapidly. And so the best part is probably just looking at all of the different, I guess, deposit styles, mineralization settings, and learning a bit more about them, and getting a broader understanding of the range that is here in Australia. I'm also enjoying a lot learning about the communication process from industry, from, I guess, this side of the fence to different stakeholders, and learning how to change my communication style between, I guess, more technical language that I'm used to in the science, to preparing more, I guess, easy to read reports and notes for different groups. But yeah, it's been a really steep learning curve, but I quite like it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Casey. Alana, can you please give us an insights on your job?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I'm an academic at James Cook University on the lands of the Bindal and the Walgarookaba people here in North Queensland in Townsville, and I'm a research, teaching and service-driven academic staff member. But most of the previous 6 years I've spent in a leadership, service and research role. And the best part of my job really is the satisfaction I get from doing something that actually makes a difference, and that is through the education of undergraduates, HDR students, and the development of collaborative research with partners here to inform environmental policy and management in Northern Australia. That's why I'm here, that's why I love it. And something I really enjoy about being an academic, and this is a conversation I've been having quite a few times the last few weeks, is about that independence that we get, and that's really powerful. We can be that honest broker, we can be an advocate if needs be, and we can speak truth to power and provide frank and fearless advice that sometimes our colleagues in government and industry may not be able to do at all times. So we have a really important role in our community, and I enjoy it very much.
Thank you so much. Well, now we will start with the questions from the topic of this International Women's Day in a more personal aspect. So today we are talking about cracking the code, and that can have a lot of different meanings. Throughout our careers, there are a lot of times when we experience a step change in the way we do things. It may be a change in understanding of what success looks like. It might be a new way of doing things that change your job, or it might be a sudden realization that changes the way you see things. Can I ask each of you to share a time in your career where you have felt like you cracked the code? And we can start again with Sus, if that's okay.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so my example is quite recent. So I'm at the moment I'm leading a contestable project. So it's one, you know, that you write the application, put it into the big funding round. And I actually tried it a few times before it was successful. And the first few times I tried to develop the proposal, I'm mid-career, I would describe myself as, but because I worked in industry and had quite a lot of time off on maternity leave, I don't feel like I'm at a mid-career level. I feel like I don't have, I'm not particularly established, I have a great track record, so I kind of still feel like an early career person at heart, but my age has left that in the dust, unfortunately. But so I was trying to develop this proposal, and I thought because I wasn't a really high profile person, I had to, and I think there's some truth to this, I felt the need to build a team of senior and established people with the kind of track record that not only have the right fit and skills for the project, but it never hurts if they've got a really good CV to add to the project team. And so I approached, with, zooming out with hindsight, the people I were approaching were all kind of senior old white men, essentially. And they were all really friendly and supportive, but they weren't very invested. So a couple of them did give me a bit of help developing the proposal, like contributed a paragraph here or there. But I largely felt like a one-man band, and I struggled to do it alone. And in the earlier times, it wasn't successful, and it was rather painful, actually, and it wasn't it's quite a punishing process. And so eventually I took a bit of a year off I needed an emotional break, and then I thought, I'm going to try it one more time. And I just approached it differently. And instead of seeking, like, the senior, the often male colleagues, I tried to find people who were more, I guess, like-minded, like myself, and I knew would be motivated to do the work. And so I ended up approaching a few colleagues and other collaborators, and ended up putting together a team. And so that the project now it was successful, and we're doing it right now. And I've got a team it's actually mostly women, and that wasn't intentional. It was just that they were the right people for the job, and several early career researchers. And for me, like, it's just been the most engaged and motivated team that I've ever worked with. And like, the team members, they seem invested. I want the team members to get something out of the project for themselves. It's not, I've worked on so many projects where it's so-and-so's project and I do my bit and pass it up the line, and I have no investment or ownership. I don't feel like I'm part of it. I just do my bit. And so, I mean, I'm trying to cultivate that in the team. I don't know if I'm being successful, but I personally feel as if it's a super engaged, really motivated team, because I just realized I maybe didn't have to do it the old way and just approach the usual suspects. And yeah, I really hope the team members feel the same way, and I just found it fantastic. Like, and I thought, I didn't have to do it that way. Yeah, and so that's my example of just not being locked into the same old process of approaching the same old people, and actually building a like-minded team that you can really work with and that will really contribute. So that's been really good.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, sometimes I feel it's hard to start doing things differently, but when you realize that it's actually a good way to approach things, yeah, that's great. Thanks for the example. Casey, do you have any example in your career about cracking the code?
Mine's not so much an example, as more of a, I guess, I think one day I had this sort of this revelatory moment when, I mean, I come from an academic background. I have a tendency to a bit of perfectionism. I want to get it right. And moving into industry, I found it quite overwhelming to go from, to move into this role where being right could, make or break a company. It was really significant that, you try to get as right as possible. And one day, not very long ago, I sort of realized that I'm like, it doesn't always have to be perfect, doesn't always have to be right. Even though your job is to be, as accurate as you can be and do the best job that you can, it's more about realizing that there's always going to be something that, throws a curveball in. It's always going to be a little bit wrong. Like, geology isn't necessarily as predictable as you'd like it to be. So it's not worth losing sleep over. And there's more things to life than just stressing about whether you're right or not. So I think it was kind of this moment where I was like, you know what? I don't have to be, so totally invested in this 100%. Like, at the end of the day, it's still just a rock. Like, it'll still be there when I come back. So I don't have to stress over it, and I don't have to be 100% right all the time, because I'm never going to be. So I guess that sort of was a bit of a step change in my thinking about the way that I approach things. And I'm a bit more relaxed now, or I try to be a bit more relaxed, a bit more chilled out about things, and allow myself to roll with I guess the punches a little bit when things don't go quite as planned, and they never go quite as planned in industry. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. I think it's a very good recommendation also for the early careers that we have in the meeting, personally myself. So thanks for that recommendation. And yeah, I can relate with that perfectionism that we have during our studies. So thanks, Casey. And Alana.
Thanks. I've been really interested in these responses. So mine's a bit similar to Suzanne. I think it's about thinking a bit differently, being not locked into the way that we traditionally do things or traditionally think about things. And really, as my career has progressed, and I've been lucky and I've developed as a human, I've been exposed to a greater diversity of leadership types and values over time. And that's really changed my perspective, or what I've been taught previously, about how we value academics and how we value researchers. there's a much broader range of metrics that are important to institutions like universities. And so I think what I found is that generating change that prioritises the wellbeing and safety of others, being a positive advocate for students and staff to enable them to reach their potential. These are very powerful tools, and they crack the code by disrupting those systemic barriers that foster inequality. And you can be rewarded for that. You can be rewarded for cracking the code to help others. And I think that's probably why I'm still here. So I think that's a really powerful thing for us to sort of achieve in our careers as well, is helping others meet their potential.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Alana. So now I will hand it over to Alanis that will keep with the questions.
So we're going to stay on the theme of like cracking the code. So we're going to talk a little bit about cracking the code with bold and transformative ideas and inclusive technologies. So as we all know by now, we've said it a few times, the theme of International Women's Day is cracking the code. And I think we can think about transformative change on a local and on a global level. So the next couple of questions kind of dive into this area. So the first question is kind of going to be about the local level. This question is, so on a local level in earth and environmental science in Australasia, what do you think is something that can be, done within the next year, maybe before the next International Women's Day, that you think would make a positive impact on the experience of women in your field or within your organisation? So this is kind of like more of a local within, I guess, your direct surroundings. So Suze, if you want to take the lead on this one again, that would be great.
I will. I'll dive in, but I'm going to preface it by saying I found this really challenging because, I mean, just where to start, it's, yeah. And I guess so I'll just bring it back to my current experience. So at GNS, I think we're trying really hard to do away with barriers. We're trying hard on the diversity and inclusion front. I feel like we have good intentions around it. We have done some good clear stuff, like we've dived into the stats on the gender pay gap, things like that. But I've been trying to work out what do I think is the biggest barrier to increase diversity and gender balance and things that are actually quite well gender balanced, I would say. I think the biggest area we're not is in senior female scientists. That's improving. And I've seen some things which seem to say that, yeah, we've got a lot of women coming through the pipeline now, but they're not always necessarily making it. Like we're not really balanced across, particularly once you get past the mid-career point. And I don't really know the answer to that. I've definitely experienced what I would describe as some really ingrained kind of beliefs from, certain groups about women's abilities and things like that. And I think one thing GNS could do, I've just been thinking about from that perspective, I just think we don't have an open enough conversation about it. Because, I've read a lot of things about how, we shouldn't see it as like if it's a gender thing and we say like, oh, it's not like women against men as such, like we work together, we're all part of the solution. And the recruiting of allies, people that can help and amplify the voices of women, and not just women, other underrepresented groups in science. And I just think we need to be like getting in his face a bit more, in all honesty. Like I think that's one thing we should do. And I think it would help also if as individuals we really had a bit of a mini shift in mindset. Like we're not just thinking about, because I believe we can all be leaders. Like if you're really passionate about increasing gender diversity and other diversity and inclusion, how are you living that every day, and like almost encouraging people to get on board with you, and just thinking about things like when I took on leadership of my team, it was a real mind shift, because I've been worrying about my career. All of a sudden I had to worry about several other people as well, and it was a real mindset. And I'm not quite sure how you kind of make that switch, but I really think there's strength in numbers and things being realized through the sum of small efforts. And I was telling a colleague, I read some research the other day about women in leadership and how they're perceived. We're supposed to be kind of subservient and nice, and when we're in authoritative positions it can jar a little bit and not land well. And they actually did some research and found that women adopting like power positions like can actually help. The kind of like behavior is better received. And so I just thought maybe women everywhere should just start, you know, manspreading. Like I want to walk into a meeting and see women in occupying as much space as possible, you know, and if you see that, that'll remind you that, yeah, I'm leading this movement too. And so, yeah, that's just a bit silly, but yeah, I've just been trying to say, like, what can I do personally, and how can I get others on board and have that cue to remind us that we're all in this together and we've all got to support each other to see change. But I honestly think I think we should be discussing it as an organization more, rather than just doing a thing like the gender pay gap thing and then shower going, oh, we did it, great, and then, oh, we've got a new policy on diversity inclusion, great. Like, what is the thing that's continuing to move that forward? So yeah, some random thoughts. I'll stop. Someone else can say something.
No, for a difficult question, I think you answered it beautifully. So I think if anyone takes away anything from today, it's manspread. Take some ownership within the room that you're in. So no, I think that was wonderful. Thank you, Suze. Casey, you can dive into the hard question now.
Yeah, I found these really hard as well. And Suze has done a really good job of taking most of my points. I actually had a really similar, I guess, kind of set of thoughts about this. And I mean, I was trying to think about a single action or something that you can change in 12 months and trying to narrow down our expectations for what we can actually achieve in 12 months. Because I think Suze really touched on it here when she said it's a bit of a work in progress, and needs to be those sort of 1% incremental shifts in dialogue and the way that we have this conversation, and involve everybody using inclusive language and get other allies on board to, I guess, you know, champion this, you know, this cause. So I guess it's a really hard thing to do. I guess one of the things that I think really would be very helpful. I mean, I don't work with any other women, but this last 12 months I've been involved in a mentoring program through the WoMENet program, and that's been really good in terms of networking and connecting me to other women who have had career paths and trajectories that look like something that I want to, that I aspire to, but then also connecting me with people who, like, I'm still very junior, but also having those connections with people who perhaps, you know, a year or two behind me, who I've met through programs with the Australian Society of Exploration Geophysicists and stuff on field camps. And I was sort of thinking about it in, I guess, this sense of elevator inspiration. So having inspirational figures in your life, both up and down the chain, so you can have this continuous conversation, both up and down, to people with more or less experience, and draw inspiration and advice and different approaches and ways of thinking from everybody. And because it's not always about just looking forward, it's about looking behind and pulling those people along with you, or helping you to get to where you are as well. So I think having those normalizing women in power positions and manspreading, taking up space, is really important. But it's also showing the people who are looking at you how to do it too, because it can be really challenging. So having that flow in both directions is really important. And I think that's something over the next 12 months that could be achieved, is engaging the conversation in both directions.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And I mean, even for Fernanda and I, like, you were kind of leading the direction for us. I mean, you taught us in undergrad, and now we're PhD students after you. So you definitely have done a great job of leading the way.
Thank you.
So thank you. Alana, would you please give us your insights?
So on a similar theme, I'm going to talk about opening up the pipeline to senior positions for women at universities. And I'm sure many of you are aware of the Athena Swan Sage program that runs through Australia. James Cook University was awarded bronze accreditation in 2020. And this year we're going to be preparing for Sage Signet accreditation to help us get to silver. And one of those signet processes that the university is looking at is promotions, academic promotions. And this is an area where I think we've actually got a lot of potential to make excellent change, positive change for women in our organisation. And hopefully other universities across the sector are also looking at the way that they do promotions too, because this is not just a JCU issue, this is a sector issue. So traditionally, we've really focused on fixing women in regards to promotions. So I've gone myself to promotions, women only promotion, professional development training exercises, where it's all about encouraging us to apply like men, to be more bold, rather than fixing the system, which is the problem here. So we need to really shift that, and that's what we're hopefully going to do at our organisation. So traditionally, the way that we measure the value of an academic is focused on individual outputs rather than teamwork. And we know that through gender stereotypes, that some types of labour, service, pastoral care, that invisible labour is disproportionately allocated to women. And these types of work are very undervalued in the promotion processes. This is particularly problematic for Indigenous women, who also do additional support for Indigenous students and colleagues as well. And this is fundamental to our university, to our institutions, that this work is done, but is not adequately reflected in our promotions process. And we also know that there are problems with promotions processes in regards to teaching evaluations, which often very of a gendered nature, and there's lots of research in that space too, and the way that we count for research output relative to opportunity. So through this review of how we do promotions and what we value here is really about making the changes to fix the system rather than to fix women, to open up that pipeline to senior positions. And I'd like to see that done within 12 months. Well, when I go for promotion, no.
Wow, that is incredible. And it's so great to be able to see that, especially JCU is putting in these initiatives and, trying really hard. And I think that it is so important across the sector for that to be happening. And I would love to see more women in senior positions. So opening that pipeline will be so beneficial to, I think, anyone in any sector. So our next question, so because we started hard, I'm just going to get even harder with the questions. So our next question is not just about local, so things that are happening within your own organisation, but maybe things that could be happening or that you think could happen on a more kind of global scale. So this is kind of like a global transformative change on a little bit of a larger scale. So could you please share with us an initiative that you think needs to happen maybe across the country or across Australia or across New Zealand, across Australasia, that would help create transformative change within our areas? Suze, over to you.
Yeah, okay, cool, thank you. Right, so my idea for this is based very much on my personal experience of being a mother who returned to the workplace. And one thing I would really like to see happen across New Zealand, I have no inkling it ever would, but is really to have a lot more support in place for men to return to the home after becoming parents. So there's things in place for women to return to the workplace. There's maternity leave and there's subsidized childcare and things like that. But true equality would go both ways and support men to return to the home after becoming parents. And I know like there's a couple of poster childs out there like Norway. But again, so in New Zealand, you're entitled to 2 weeks unpaid leave as a new father if you're not the primary caregiver instead of your partner or however it works. Here at GNS, we offer that leave is paid, so you get 2 weeks paid, and that in New Zealand is regarded as like really good. And the reason I think this would be so transformative for women is like it does come a lot to Alana's point about a lot of the unseen work that women do. And I just thought if you would inject that and it became normal for men to return to the home, then I mean there's a few things. It would disrupt women's careers less for the women who are career minded. I think it would help the gender pay gap because we work at GNS on you have a yearly review and that's your pay rise, and if you weren't here you can't get a pay rise, and so you always end up lagging a bit, and that's hard to fix if you're actually not here. But the other thing is, I think over time, if you had this generation of men going through the workplace who did take leave from their own careers to look after, they would just have so much more knowledge and experience of what it is like to be a working parent. And, you know, for example, I had my male boss, when I returned to work after having he told me my attitude wasn't very good. And I was at this point struggling with mental health issues and really struggling to function. And, you know, I was really struck by, firstly, how insensitive that was, and realized it wasn't meant in a really bad way, but I just thought, my God, he has no idea. He has no idea like what it is like to do this. Because I think at that point, like in his generation, was more traditional roles where he continued to work and his wife didn't work and raised the children. I think that's softening anyway with modern society. Often both partners have to work just to you know, be able to have a reasonable quality of life and things like that. And so I just thought, you know, and then there was a sense of like the kind of entitlement, like why he felt it was necessary to say it. And I just thought, you know, maybe that's something that could really soften and change through over time, if it was just far more normal for men to be a really equal partner in parenting and working. Because it really is, you know, it's about work and life. It comes together, and it needs both of you to be in on that. So yeah, if I could put, I don't know, make myself a sign and go and protest outside Parliament, it would be to get to really make it equal, and not just like one of you can take it or the other. Like, can both parties have access to that leave?
Well, yeah, that is incredible, and I completely agree. And I think, you know, trying to get rid of those stereotypes of, you know, the woman staying home with the children, and, you know, those things are societal, and we slowly, hopefully we'll be able to change them. But I think that's a wonderful idea. Casey, do you have any global initiatives that you think might change the world?
Yeah, this was a really hard question, but I think, you know, my thoughts on this sort of echo those of Suzanne. I mean, I guess my thoughts on this is that we need to be bringing everyone along for the ride in terms of equality. I feel like there is this idea that, I guess, we've jumped straight into okay, let me rephrase this a little bit differently. I feel like the movement for women to obtain equal positions in work and in life, and to be able to, you know, step outside of the home in those traditional roles has happened relatively quickly if you sort of look back over the last couple of generations. And whilst that's happened, we haven't had this parallel education or shift for men. So I think there's a lot of potentially men out there who aren't quite sure how to react, or where they fit in this equal space, because no one's there sort of bringing them along and having the conversation with them. It feels very one-sided sometimes, and I think this is where the equality debate can get a bit one-sided and a bit vitriolic sometimes. So I think it's about sort of reframing the conversation, using more inclusive language, bringing people along for the ride, and having those conversations about, you know, both parents taking leave. Like, I don't have kids, so I can't speak to that. But from my perspective, I'd like to in the future have a partner who's able to take as much time off with kids as I am. And it's about, you know, having equal opportunity and having a conversation about having women having exposure to opportunities that maybe were predominantly reserved for men in the past, but them having that exposure now isn't disadvantaging men who have exposure to those opportunities. It's about bringing everyone to the table. I think it's a really hard ask, but it's about those sort of 1% things that we can do to bring our colleagues, bring our partners, bring our friends along, people who want to be there with us as allies in getting us to a place where everyone's, you know, really happy and satisfied, because it takes all types, and women bring a lot of value. All sorts of different groups, minority groups, bring lots of value to different teams, and through different lenses and perspectives, and it's important to have everyone there.
Yeah, I think we've tried to do it ourselves, and I think that we've probably learned over time that we actually need to incorporate as many people as possible in order to make you know, some true change within our society. So thank you, Casey. Alana.
These are great responses, and I found it really difficult to answer this question, obviously, because the world's a very diverse place, right?
Yeah.
And transformative change is going to look different depending upon where you are and what context you're in. But something that we have globally is our leaders. And following on from what Casey said, what we really need to focus on, I think, is leadership and their accountability. And so leaders need to take responsibility for promoting gender equity within their organisations, and they need to drive change within their organisations, which I think Suzanne was alluding to as well. We need to be making sure that they set the right benchmarks for gender equity and other forms of equity and inclusion as well, monitoring that progress and holding themselves to account for achieving that change too. And I really enjoy following the Gender Pay Gap bot on Twitter. I'm sure a few others follow this too. And I find it a really satisfying way of calling out performance rather than action. And I think it's really important that our leaders are public with their gender equity initiatives and driving that change within their organisations, because I think that's really important for bringing our communities with us as well, and for educating people to make that systemic and cultural change and those cultural shifts that Casey was talking about as well. But it also takes a lot of hard, quiet, invisible labour behind the scenes too to get this job done. And we need to make sure that our leaders are doing that work as well as the performative.
Yes, definitely. I think the leaders are meant to be a representation of the people who they lead. So I think that, we have to try and change from the top and from the bottom. So I think that they're all wonderful answers to our terribly hard questions. So I'm sorry. But we're going to move in a slightly different direction now. So we're going to get a little bit more personal. So we're going to we're also going to open the questions up to the floor. So if anyone in our audience has a question, you can please write them into the chat, or if you'd like to remain anonymous, you can send me a direct message and we can ask those questions for you as well. But while you guys are thinking of questions, one first question that we've prepared earlier is, so they'd like to remain anonymous, but this is more directed towards Casey. So as a female geologist, how do you perceive the current state of gender representation in the mining and geoscience industry? Do you think the industry is becoming more inclusive for women? And do you believe that there's still a long way to go? Additionally, what are your thoughts on the potential benefits of increasing femininity within this field? So Casey, I know it's a big question, but if you'd like to take a jab at that.
Yeah, it's a huge question. So I guess, okay, so I'm going to try and address it in parts, and I hope I'll remember them all. But with respect to, is there a long way to go in the industry? I think so. One of the things that I'm very aware of most times is that I'm quite often the only woman in the room, and that's even going to sites which have, good equity numbers, or I say good, but maybe they've got 10 or 15 or 20% women in their camp or on site. One of the things, though, that isn't very necessarily transparent about that is that 10 or 15% of those women, maybe 4 are technical staff, and most of them are just supporting roles. So I think there's a real long way to go in that. I think one of the biggest, this sort of touches back on a couple of points I made about challenges that I face in my job. It's that quite often young, and not just women, but just junior staff or early career staff tend to be overlooked or dismissed, or their thoughts or opinions on things aren't necessarily as weighty as other people. So there's not a lot of encouragement to keep putting forward your ideas and keep putting yourself up there and keep working towards it. So I think in particular, for me as a young woman, feeling dismissed constantly is really challenging, and it's something that needs to change. It's also I guess, intensely problematic to go out to site. And like, I'm a pretty girly girl. I like having my nails done every now and then and having nice hair and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, to go out to site and have that count against me when it doesn't mean anything with respect to my skills or my abilities or my desire to get in there and, you know, get my hands dirty. There's this massive gulf in perception between, you know, someone's skills and what they look like, and it affects women in particular. I'm trying to think of what else was in that question now.
No, the other part of it was, do you think that the industry is becoming more inclusive for women? So do you think that there's some changes that are slowly happening?
Yes, so it is getting there slowly. There's a lot of really, really good people out there. So in all of this conversation, we shouldn't discount the really good people that are out there. I've been very lucky so far to have met some amazing men who have been very capable mentors, more than willing to show me and to teach me and to guide me, because I've got no idea what I'm doing. I'm just making it up as I go along most of the time, it feels like. You know, and I think as we move, I guess, forward, some of that old boys club mentality is sort of exiting the room a little bit, and you've got these more engaged and interested people who are willing to take all types of groups of people and their opinions into consideration. So the industry is changing slowly. Yeah, I think it's just going to take a while.
Yeah. And then the last little part of that question is, what are the potential benefits of increasing women within the field?
So I listened to a GeoHug talk last year, and one of the comments in that really stuck with me was, you know, the discovery rate in minerals exploration is, I don't know, 1 in 10,000, you know, projects or drill holes or whatever the numbers were. It was some phenomenal number. And the comment that they made was, you know, to date, these exploration companies are dominated by these older gentlemen who have a way of thinking which is clearly not creating innovation or significant discovery at any rapid rate at the moment. So increasing the diversity of people with different ideas and different ways of looking at problems surely will have some benefit increasing the rate of discovery. So I think including more women, but also different minority groups, different cultural backgrounds, different groups is going to advantage the industry in a big way by just increasing the way that we think. Not everyone thinks in the same way and links ideas in the same way. So I can't think of a bad reason to have more women. It's only going to be good for us.
Yeah, definitely. Suze, do you, I mean, you had some previous experience within industry. Have you seen or noticed any changes from maybe when you were in industry to what you see industry like now?
Yeah, good question. So it would have been, how long ago now? You know, getting on 15 years when I first got my first job. There were definitely a lot less women involved at that point. Like, as you say, Casey, many women in support roles, but I could easily be the only woman in a room, in a meeting room any given day, or in a call to one of the oil rigs, there'd be, loads of men and then me. So I kind of feel like it's in part like time is helping to soften it, as you said, Casey. I think there's real work to do on the kind of role model front, and organizations like mine, like GNS, getting in kids' faces, going, this is what scientist looks like. It can be a woman, it can be from different ethnicities and backgrounds. We have huge problems with inclusion of certain groups in New Zealand science, like Maori and Pacifica. But I do think it's improving on the gender balance front. And I really liked your comment, Casey, about, I think what you were describing was the echo chamber of where you have people who have been brought up in like similar, they come from similar backgrounds, similar institutions, similar educations, and then you don't have people looking at what other people aren't seeing. And the other thing, I kind of am answering Casey's question more than mine, but like I want to be very careful not to imprint like gender stereotypes on women, but I do think there's a tendency for women to be more aware, I guess, of and you mentioned it too, Alana, well-being, and kind of looking out for others, kind of more that nurturing aspect. And I think in large part we're taught by society we should be doing that. So I do think, and again, I mean, very careful here, it's not the same for all women, but I do think women bring a certain amount of sensitivity that men often don't, and a certain, you might not like this word, but a certain softness. And I just think that, like, I'm quite a sensitive soul, and I have a very sensitive child at home. And I've had this realization that society really values toughness, and look at where it's gotten us. You know, maybe I would love to see a bit more room for softness in society and what it could do for everyone, everywhere, if we could all be in touch a bit more with our softer sides. But I think, come back to the question you actually asked me, Alanis, it's just more that I just think there are definitely more women coming through all levels, like we've said. I actually wonder, and I'll just make this brief, but you know, one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is this might be a bit left of field, but I actually wonder how much of an impact that menopause has on women in senior positions. If there was any other disorder, or sorry, condition, it's not a disorder, that is guaranteed to affect 50% of the population, and is something we never talk about, we never mention, and the effect on some women can be profound. And there is actually some thought amongst experts in that healthcare field that it could be one of the reasons why we don't see women coming through at really senior levels. It's just they're going through it, and they feel they can't push themselves forward for really challenging positions because they're having health struggles. So yeah, time is helping, but it's not enough, I suppose.
Yeah, wow, I actually have never even thought of that, and I think that is really interesting and should really be part of the conversation. So thank you so much for that insight. So one of the next questions we have, and it's to all of the panel members, but I'll ask Alana first, is how do you, as panelists, how do you deal with being the token female and always having the expectation that you will be the one to be the face of diversity at the meetings or at conferences? It all takes a toll when you're the only one who has to kind of take on all of that additional load. You know, we try and take on that load to forward women within our fields, but it does take a toll. So do you have any insights to that, Alana?
The irony of that question.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that I was complaining about with my husband last night. It's like, why do we constantly have to wear the burden of this, right?
Yeah, and be on panels, right? So,
you know, like, so this is the first of two things that I'm doing this week for International Women's Week, and this is something I do think is incredibly important to do. But again, why do we have to wear the burden of all of this and carry all of this all the time? This is a leadership issue. This is a system issue. That's who is responsible for this. It is not just us. We cannot do it alone. And in fact, we will never make change if we do this kind of events every day of the week for the next 20 years, right? It's these other sort of systemic issues that need to be dealt with, right? So I do find it, you know, in the middle of the night when I'm like bloody preparing this, you know, my questions or whatever, and another speech I've got to do at a school later this week, it's like, oh God, you know, again, you know, all the men that I work with, they're writing papers, they're spending time with their families, they're doing all of this other business that matters for their personal career development. But again, and this goes back to one of the things that I spoke about, one of the responses to the question I had earlier as well, right? As a society in Australia, we're shifting what we value in people and their contributions. That is shifting. And I've noticed that through my career, that shift is happening. And it's maybe I'm more aware of it, but in the last couple of years, I'm noticing this shift happening more, in that we are valuing now these services that are being disproportionately provided by people like yourselves doing these activities, and you will be rewarded for it. So, I'm happy. I'm very happy to continue to do it, but sometimes the burden does piss me off, to say the least.
That's fair enough.
Hopefully, I answered your question. So I was just getting angry.
No, definitely. Suze, did you want to touch on this question a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess all I'll add really is to say, I mean, I guess I have been the token woman in a few situations, and if I just suddenly become aware, oh my goodness, I'm the only woman here, I almost take a little bit of perverse pleasure out of it. I'm like, I'm here to show that when we're here and we're not going away, and this is what the future looks like, no matter who feels any way about it. And I often deal with it if it ever has become a bit awkward. I tend to deflect it, I guess, with humor. And sometimes I wonder why I do that. Why make it easy? If it's uncomfortable, then yeah. But yeah, I suppose in some part I totally agree. It's like a bit tiresome, but in another way, on behalf of women, and then I guess like other underrepresented groups, like in a way it's a little bit of a privilege to do it as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll take this time to then firstly apologize. I'm sorry that we've asked you to do the panel, but I think you're all amazing panel members.
Great.
And I think you're providing such incredible insight to everyone who's here today. Casey, I've got another question for you. Do you think, or do you think that, or do any women working within the mining industry, so you, Casey, feel that their career might stagnate when they have a baby? Or go into those childbearing years?
I think the short answer is yes. I kind of, from my own perspective, I mean, I'm still a few years off that from my end, but it is something that is sort of front of mind for me, and it's something that I'm aware of in my day-to-day planning and looking at my 5-year plan for my career and where I want to be and what I want to end up doing. And I guess with all of that in mind, I'm trying to do all of the field work that I can now. I'm trying to do all of the things, get all the places, go all of the hard, remote, distant areas that one day I won't be able to maybe get to quite so easily, because I think that it's going to be near impossible, right? So I do think I do think sometimes that it will not stagnate, but it will just change. And I think this is one of the bigger reasons why you don't see as many technical staff in more senior roles or field-based roles if they choose to also have a family, because then you have these competing priorities, and you can't have both as much as we would like to. Sometimes you can have both sometimes, but not all the time. And one of those things is working FIFO. Like, it's not really set up for that. And if you want to be close to grandparents as well as family, like working residentially, it's not really an option either. So it's something that is front of mind. I guess the only other comment that I'll make on that is I did meet a woman late last year who she works as she's a consultant geologist. She's very technically skilled. She's a brilliant woman. And when she had her child, she got offered a job with a company, a larger company, who, they really wanted her. They really wanted her skills. And she said, well, I've just had a baby. You can only have me if I can hire a nanny to come with me, so I can bring my baby with me. And it was a negotiation between her and her husband at the time. But, for the 2 weeks or whatever, she was able to take this small child with her and a nanny, which was, some, tuppence to the company cost, but enabled them to get her who they wanted because of her skills. And I was like, that's something I would never have ever thought of doing. And it's going to stick with me now, because I'm like, you know what, if she can do it, so can anyone else. So I'm kind of like, well, maybe it doesn't have to, stagnate as much as I thought it did. So it's, yeah, that's a really interesting way of taking it on. I was like, wow, I'm pretty impressed. So yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Casey. Suze or Alana, did you have anything else that maybe you can input? I mean, having a baby in maybe your industries, and did you feel like, or do you feel like careers stagnate when you do decide to have a family?
Okay, I guess I'll come in and say, I think the most obvious impact is that it is really it's a really great thing to have the option to be part-time for the early years of your child's life. Like, life comes at you full on in the face, and it's a difficult balance to strike. And I think it's because traditionally that role does typically fall to women. Then I think that's the biggest like impact day to day that having a child or becoming a parent has on women's careers. Is, I mean, and often the women want to do that role. You know, I feel like very grateful I was able to take maternity leave, and because you never have that time again with the little ones. But it was really hard for me, and yeah, I definitely had a few years there where I achieved very little on the work front. It was basically just trying to keep moving. And that's why I kind of I'd really love to see more equality on the parental leave front. Is I just think that would probably be the biggest impact. But well, maybe biggest way you could shift that from women. But yeah, it definitely it's a terrible way to put it with having children, but it definitely puts the brakes on, you know. And I hear, like, I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, I hear in America where it's got a pretty crap maternity leave for mothers. You basically have that choice: you have children and finish your career, or you don't and maintain a career. Like for women in academic and science sectors, it's almost an insurmountable obstacle in countries like America, where you don't have such good maternity support.
Something that I've been talking about with colleagues recently is, and it's something that I've experienced in my career, and I know other women have too. But when you return from parental leave, when you have children, it's the opportunities start to dry up, because in my field, in academia, it's this insidiousness, this belief that you're at this time of your life you're prioritising something else over your academic achievements or your academic goals. It's gross to say it, feels gross to think about it, but I think that that's responsible for a lot of the changes in opportunities available for women in academia and their advancement, is this belief that our priorities lie elsewhere. It's a very difficult thing to deal with, because it's cultural and social. It's not something that we can easily change with a policy or procedure. Yeah, again, leadership issue.
Yeah.
I was going to put all the effort and responsibility on those guys.
It always comes full circle, doesn't it? Well, I mean, it's 1 o'clock, so it's technically the end of our panel discussion. I have so many questions in the chat that I still could ask you, but you know, keeping in mind that we don't want you guys to be the token females or women for today. We don't want to take up too much of your time. So I would really like to just thank all of our panelists for attending today. I'll send you guys an email with all of the questions that we've got, if you have the time to maybe deliver some insights into those questions. But we would really, on behalf of WOMEESA, would love to thank you, Casey, Suze and Alana, for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedules and being able to provide your insights to our members and to anyone who participated within this panel today. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate
Thank you.
it. Yeah.
No, it was an absolute delight. You guys were amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Stop.